Hello, I'm Mike Buchanan, leader of the political party Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them. I'm also the conference director, and I'm joined by the indefatigable Sally Burris of Split the Difference. Sally, a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to having a chat to Richard and all the questions, because I'm really interested in the whole family party. Brilliant.
Indeed. Richard Lucas is leader of the Scottish Family Party, a party he launched 4 years ago. I think it's a really, really interesting party, and I actually came to the decision some months ago that that I would rebrand my own party as a pro-family, pro-children, and pro-life party. And it was only then, I have to say, that I checked out Richard's party and manifesto and so on. And I was just knocked out by how impressive it all was. I mean, really, just so much quality thinking has got into it. So, I mean, very informing and very inspiring. So, Richard, a very warm welcome, and perhaps you'd like just to take a minute to talk about yourself and your party.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for inviting me. It's great to be part of the conference. I've enjoyed what I've seen. I've watched a good few hours already. There's been lots of fascinating content. A little about the family party. So we're just 4 years old. We're a sort of socially conservative party. Basically, my frustration grew over many years about the lack of a socially conservative voice in the Scottish Parliament, and eventually came to the conclusion the only way that's going to happen is if people are going to vote for it. It's not going to happen by writing letters to MPs or MSPs or whatever. People have got to use the democratic process to vote people into the Parliament in order to represent what they really believe. So the whole philosophy of the Scottish Family Party, we're really geared to the Scottish electoral system, which has got a proportional representation element in it. So what we're trying to do is to get a couple of MSPs into the Parliament. Once we got that couple in, they'd get massive media coverage. You've made the breakthrough, and then I think we'd get quite a few more. So our vision, at least not in the short or medium term, our vision is not to be running the country, to becoming the government. But our vision is to get a couple of people in the Parliament who are going to talk some sense, who are going to just give the other side of the arguments on a whole range of issues where currently it's just totally uniform. All the parties, all the MSPs basically say the same thing. So we would open up debate, let's put it that way, stir things up, cause a bit of controversy, and hopefully start shifting public opinion.
Sally, I wonder if you could start off the questions with Alex's question.
Okay, so Alex says, I really like the direction you are taking with this, Richard. Is there a party in England, Wales, and or at Northern Ireland that has similar aims?
Right, that's interesting. Now, over the years, there have been parties sort of vaguely similar. They've generally tended to be explicitly Christian. And we're very definitely not that. We're a secular party. We've got Muslims, we've got Buddhists, we've got atheists, we've got all sorts within it. We're probably a majority of Christians. So we're taking a different approach to that. Similar party in England, well, Justice for Men and Boys is, as Mike has said, is going to transform into a sort of family-themed party. So I think there'll be significant similarities there. You'll have to compare manifestos when the two parties exist to see how similar they are. But there are
they're going to be similar, Richard. Trust me.
Now, what we've thought in Scotland is we're geared towards the Scottish electoral system. So other parts of the UK with a similar electoral system, it would make sense for a party of a similar style to get started. So we've had people interested in starting a Welsh family party, but it didn't really, there wasn't really someone to take the initiative and get it going. We've also had people who've been interested in starting a London family party. But again, in the end, there wasn't the person or the group of people to drive it forward. But they would be things we thought would make sense. But our focus is very definitely in Scotland. If you're familiar with Scottish politics, almost all, or a vast majority of the sort of issues that we're interested in are devolved issues. So they're dealt with in the Scottish Parliament. So we think that's where we need to focus exclusively. And in Scotland, being a Scottish party is a big advantage, rather than being an offshoot of a UK party. So that's what we're doing there.
Do you ever get asked, Richard, how is it that someone who, at least by your voice, is not a Scotsman, is leading a Scottish party?
Occasionally. occasionally. Yeah, I mean, sometimes a Scottish nationalist will try and make an issue of it. Sometimes you just get the point blank, go home, you're English. Why should we listen to you? You're from England. They're sort of xenophobic. I don't know if you call it racist, whatever. So yeah, but there is that element in Scottish politics. I mean, does it put off anyone who might remotely consider voting for the Scottish Family Party? Probably not. I mean, probably people who take that sort of attitude are so far gone. I mean, they're well ensconced in the existing parties, so I don't think we need to worry about that.
So do you think Scotland has become more racist since the advent of Nicola Fishface?
I think the Scottish nationalism, there's a nasty edge to Scottish nationalism that's been around for a long, long time, since before the Scottish Parliament even existed. I'm not saying it's a majority of Scottish nationalists, but sometimes even some unionists can be pretty anti-English in the things they'll say. Remember when I first came to Scotland, there was a World Cup, and a friend of mine in my flat, a Scottish bloke, he would support anyone but England. So I'd be watching England, wanting them to win, and he would just be cheering like crazy for whoever they're playing, just to annoy me, just to make the point. And I'd say, what are you doing? I said, people in England support Scotland when they're playing. And he just wouldn't believe me. He would not believe the English people usually support all the other home nations in the World Cup. So there are some unusual attitudes there. But as I say, it's not like something you encounter day to day. It's there with some people. It's probably there with often the sort of people who might have some other unfortunate attitudes as well. So nothing to worry about too much.
I don't think you'd call yourself a men's rights activist, Richard. And we actually disagreed in the course of the live interview with Anne Widdecombe over an issue. I won't recap that. But do you? I've increasingly come to the view in recent months that abortion, that the whole feminist power it's a house of cards, and I'm increasingly believing that abortion is a card at the bottom of the pile, which once removed, the house of cards will collapse. And the more time I think about it, the more I think it is going to become the flagship issue for the men's rights movement. I don't know if you think that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think it's an argument waiting to be won. It's a moral outrage that they're managing to just shroud in mist to the degree that it doesn't really enter people's consciousness, but it very easily could do. And I think there could be change pretty rapidly. And I think that would be a seismic shift in UK culture and politics. I think it's happened in America. I think the stirrings of it in a lot of other parts of the world as well. So I really do think the pro-life cause is going to march forward quite quickly in the UK. And I think there will be furious backlash to that, absolutely furious.
Good. I hope so, Richard, because at the end of the day, it's better than the issue being ignored. I would rather people going crazy on the streets about this than continue with this, unopposed 73 million killings, every year. It's a genocide with no end in sight, and it is that because of feminists. We can absolutely put that, it is feminists who are driving this genocide.
I think it's a big factor. I think what makes the issue untouchable for a lot of people is it's presented as a women's issue. And in the Scottish Parliament and other places, as soon as it's a women's issue, people just think, oh well, we can't go against that. Because I don't need to tell either of you this, but obviously in UK politics, a feminist line is put forward as the pro-women line, as though that's just taken for granted. And it's the same on this one. With the BBC on abortion, their bias is appalling, absolutely appalling. But I think part of that is that they're getting worried. That's why they're in overdrive on the issue, as they are just starting to get a bit worried that the tide's turning.
Do you want me to ask, or are you going to
Yes,
ask?
please, Sally. Go on.
Sean has asked, Richard, you summarise the formal political culture of Scotland as entirely pro-feminist. Does this mean that in order to address anything at all the feminism will object to, men's rights, the unborn, support for marriage, etc., it is necessary first to be anti-feminist and to say so.
Right, okay, I would technically describe myself as an anti-feminist. If you look at the Wikipedia definition of anti-feminist, then I think you have to be one of three things, and I tick all three of them. So technically, I'm an anti-feminist. I don't tend to describe myself that way because I think there's a lot of women in particular who regard themselves, that have some sort of warmth to feminism, but it's to do with things. Yes, I think women should have the vote. Some men are sexually predatory or whatever. So there's some genuine issues in there. And the problem I think, in describing myself as saying I'm anti-feminist is it needs a lot of explaining exactly what I mean, because some people will be thinking that I'm disagreeing with them on some things I don't disagree with. So what I'd rather do is look at the actual specific points. When I'm looking at the points, I will say the problem is that generally feminists are saying this, but they're wrong. And this is why they're wrong. So I mean, yeah, I am an anti-feminist, but generally I don't wear that badge, if you like. I'd rather approach issues differently because I think it's unnecessarily divisive, and it takes too much explaining to be anti-feminist. I'd rather start with the issues.
It's actually, that's very interesting, Richard. It's actually the reason that there is a division among MRAs, some of whom will call themselves, I think pretty well all of them are anti-feminist, but some of them would never describe themselves as such. Whereas people like myself, I sometimes wear a T-shirt with "This is what an anti-feminist looks like," and then my party's URL beneath it. Because I think when there is a conflation in the public mind, I think, between anti-feminist and anti-women. But I think that then just means that you need to explain why you would be an anti-feminist, and I'm very happy to do that. I mean, the thing I won't do is to spend time arguing with feminists, because you may as well try and argue with a cat. It's literally as pointless as that.
Well, I know there's some people who describe themselves as feminists, but would basically agree with me on a lot of the issues. A lot of the points where I disagree with feminists, I think what normally goes under the banner of feminism in the UK today, I disagree with the vast majority of it. So just the doorbell ringing. But for some people who call themselves feminists, they would actually agree with me on my opinion on a lot of those issues. But they still have got the idea that in some way or for some reason they are feminist in one way or another. Now, it may be that they haven't really got a rationale for that. Maybe they would be more accurate to not describe themselves as a feminist. But it's a bit of a tangle. And I'm sure, given a couple of hours over a cup of coffee, you could probably clarify it and make some sense of it. But if you're speaking to a wider audience, you don't really get the chance. You leave yourself open to the to sort of glib responses that might hit home with people.
I think, yes, I think there's an emotional attachment. I think you're absolutely spot on there, Richard. But I will ask, I mean, in fact, there's a conference speaker, I won't name her, who calls herself a feminist still. And so I said to her, this wasn't during the live Q&A. What rights are you looking for now? What, that you don't have? And she couldn't think of one. And I said, well, then why call yourself it's a meaningless badge. But I think women are sort of like group creatures more than men, and there's a nervousness about coming out as anti-feminists, which is one of the reasons we admire anti-feminist women so much. I'd just like to come to Douglas's question, and for anyone who doesn't know, Douglas gave a presentation on the impact of the United Nations, which impacts on national governments. A very interesting presentation, and I look forward to his Q&A. Douglas writes this: Richard, your party's policy on adoption seems light on adoption issues. Will you be strong on supporting families to hold on to their children, beating back against the trend to take children from their family at the slightest excuse?
Absolutely, that's very clear in our policies. We've also got the policy that if a decision's been made whether or not to take children away from a family, our policy is that decision should be made by a jury, which we think would provide a lot more balance and basically a bit more common sense, and would rein in activists, etc. And we think you would get sounder judgments. So that is very much an issue that we're concerned about. And we've heard all sorts of horror stories on that front. Often the story can't be told because there's a live legal case. Sometimes as well, we have to bear in mind, okay, you've heard half of the story, you're not quite sure it's the whole story, but I'm sure that there's a lot of cases where children are being removed unnecessarily. Yeah.
Okay.
Sally, over to you.
Yeah. So Sean has asked, I think the reason feminists hate marriage is because marriage makes women happy. Would you agree?
I think they also hate it because it makes men unhappy. No, they should like it for that reason, shouldn't they?
Yeah, they should.
I would disagree that marriage makes men unhappy. I think the evidence is to the contrary. Feminists hate marriage. I agree with that bit. I agree that marriage makes women happy, but I don't think they deliberately oppose marriage with the intent to make women unhappy. I think the idea is just that anytime they see some sort of asymmetry in any sort of relationship, the assumption is this is the patriarchy in action. This is women being oppressed and exploited. Whereas I think the asymmetries traditionally associated with marriage didn't necessarily do that. But why they hate marriage now, I just think it's completely irrational. I wouldn't like to suggest a line of reasoning that leads to their hostility to marriage, because marriage is basically designed to make men behave the way that women want and need them to. So women should be seeing marriage as the perfect thing, because what they want is a man to commit, be there as a father to the children, be faithful, etc. And marriage was a means was a social institution that was designed to encourage men to do that. This is exactly what women want. But then for some reason, women have started to see it as something that's against their interests. It's totally bizarre. I think that's another thing where it's an argument waiting to be won, because it's so clear and obvious that that's the case. And yet the majority of the population have never begun to think about this issue. So that's something that I said about, getting MSPs in the parliament in order to present points of view that are just completely absent at the moment. That would be one of them, would be the rationale for marriage.
It's interesting, Richard, because you raised the point about that there are certain, I don't know if you put it this way, but there are certain battles to be fought in the public forum. Things need to explore. And I guess we would have a lot in common, but for me, feminism would be one of those things, which is what, we're the only anti-feminist party in the English-speaking world. And I guess your point would be, oh, there's better battles. There's better battles.
It's just feminism isn't clearly enough defined within the public consciousness to be able to take it on. No,
I quite agree. Which it's part of the reason why it's one of our core things that we do help people understand it.
Yeah, an example would be, an analogy would be, let's say you had a party that was totally skeptical about climate change, didn't believe in climate change, and they call themselves the anti-green party. Well, the problem with that is they probably think that the anti-green party wants to allow fly tipping at the end of the street. They want to now allow, a factory being built on the forest down the road. They don't care about air pollution and whatever, the health effects of air pollution. So it would be giving a message, would be giving too broad a message than what's intended. So that's the issue with feminism. It's not clearly enough defined in the public consciousness to be able to make into a political issue, I think.
Sean G asks, in a world full of happy women, could feminism exist?
I think a lot of feminists at the moment are happy.
Great question.
I think they're getting everything that they want, and it's not driven by unhappiness. On the other hand, through the decades of feminism, women have become more and more unhappy. There's lots of evidence for that from different countries. So that's an interesting. I think feminism tends to create unhappiness. If you have the mentality that everything's against you and you're being oppressed and discriminated against, then that's likely to lead you to look on the negative side of everything. And
well, it's basically unhappy, almost invariably deeply dysfunctional women who never had a relationship with a father or had a very poor one, and they're just determined to spread their misery. I mean, I mean, that is a major driver of feminism. There's no doubt.
I would say that's a factor. I would also say, right, don't turn me off. Okay, don't eliminate me from the discussion. I think that might be the case with some men's rights activists as well. Their personal experiences have led them to a hostility towards women in general. But I would say within both movements, that's a minority. Well, look, with feminism, a lot of girls go to school without any particular issues in their background, but they're just taught feminist doctrine, and a lot of cases they just believe it.
Yeah, of course I'm not going to mute you, Richard.
I was only joking.
But I honestly do not know an MRA. I can't remember the word you used, but I guess hopefully the word a misogynist is kind of where you're coming from, or hostile towards women. I don't know a single MRA who is hostile towards women. I mean, they would not be regarded as mainstream, whereas in feminism, the really hate-driven women are the leaders. They are the ones in positions of power. Nicola bloody Sturgeon is being a very obvious example.
With Nicola Sturgeon, as I said earlier, I mean, she is a female supremacist.
Yes.
She's obsessed with women. So she'll talk about the way, it's so important to have a group of women around her. Every time she talks about a book she's read, it's a book by a woman about women and girls. Every time, every issue they can come across from a gender angle, it's always, the implication is if people could just be a bit more like women and girls, then the world would be a better place. I mean, where that comes from, I mean, who knows whether or not she's just been persuaded by the sort of academic, so-called academic case. I don't know, or if there's some personal issues that have led to that. I suppose with anyone, everyone's political views are a combination of rationality and emotion and experience. I mean, I don't know if you read Jonathan Haidt's book. I mean, his thesis is basically that it's virtually all emotion and experience and genetics and just natural inclinations. Then we put a veneer of rationality over the top of it. I feel he's a bit pessimistic on that. I think people are more swayed by rational arguments, but they're swayed by the rational arguments that they hear, not by the ones that they don't hear. So if you have generations of girls going through education, and boys as well, who are only hearing one side of the argument and they're hearing an awful lot of it, then that's going to tend to result in people accepting that. Particularly when it's presented as a virtue. It's not just the truth, it's also a virtue. You're a good person. It's not just you're intelligent, you're a good person if you accept that line. So it's tempting.
But given that Nicola Sturgeon has been, I suppose, in political terms, very successful, what can explain the fact that so many Scotsmen are turkeys voting for Christmas?
It's bizarre, isn't it? It really is bizarre. I think a lot of people, I don't want to sound sort of patronizing here, but I think a lot of the electorate, if you like, they're not necessarily sort of critical thinkers. They need someone to point out what's going on. So if you gave me a slot on primetime TV every week, and you forced all men in Scotland to sit and watch it, and I could present the evidence of the week about the way basically men have been denigrated and the things are skewed towards women, I'm sure opposition would grow. It would dawn on people that say, right, we've had enough of this. This is completely wrong. We don't want this mentality in the Scottish Parliament. But if people are left to their own devices to notice it for themselves, to crystallize it into a some more articulatable form, that's generally not going to happen. It needs people to be presenting the case that people can then say, oh, I see that. Yeah, I'd noticed that as well. I get that. But at the moment, that just doesn't happen. The feminist skeptical voice is just completely absent in Scottish public life. Even people who will push their luck on other issues, like the Scottish Conservatives, like on the transgender issue, you'll get a couple of them just speaking out and opposing parts of it. So, they'll push a little bit in the Conservative direction occasionally, but they will not touch anything to do with feminism. That is just sacrosanct. Even the most outspoken and controversial ones, they won't touch it.
And you may know that there's an SNP MSP who talked for 12 minutes at the International Men's Day debate. There's only 9 or 10 people there, And he started off by saying, I don't think this should exist. This day should exist, and ended up by saying, when we've resolved all women's issues, then perhaps we can worry about men's. I mean, really appalling. The SNP MP's contributions to the International Men's Day debates over the years have been scandalous. I
met an SNP supporter once in Fort William. He got his badge on. All the other branch members knew him. He was obviously a member of the SNP branch. And I got chatting to him. And he said he thought the ideal society would be one that was about sort of 80 or 90% female. So you have just enough males for breeding purposes, but you get a much healthier, more harmonious society if the vast majority were women.
Because yes, I mean, we really could rely on women to put up the power lines again, following a storm and work in the sewers, all those jobs that they absolutely love to do.
Now he's not representative of the SNP, obviously, but on the other hand, you obviously feel the SNP is the party for him. Let's put it that way.
Yes, and you have to despair when you hear people like that. It makes me mad. I try not to get mad, but if I'm faced with someone like that, I just lose it sometimes. But never mind.
There's a contradiction. I mean, I hear sweeping statements about generalistic viewpoints about it's this, it's that, it's the other. There's a recipe why women are the way they are. There's not one clear reason. There's a recipe of 5 or 6 dominant reasons why feminism exists the way it does in this extreme at the moment. But there's a contradiction in Scotland, because now and again I'll dip in to different bits of research I've done historically, and I looked about 4 or 5 months ago at the rates of conversion or reversion into Islam, whichever you want to use. So in Scotland, the highest rates are in girls. I said this earlier, but I think it was something between the ages of 18 and 24 into Islam, which, as you know, for a young woman to choose that is kind of like it's making a statement, because in Islam there's the rights of the woman and the rights of the man, and there's the roles of the woman and the roles of the man, and the roles of the woman is to cover, to respect her partner, her family. There's a lot of like core principles in there. And for normally it's women who are older. You'd expect somebody like me, going into their 30s or 40s. And yet in Scotland, Scotland was the highest figures of all across the UK in that age group. So there's a contradiction in there somewhere, that says that younger women are maybe thinking about something else. There's another perspective that's attracting them to that old and more traditional role.
I wonder, Sally, it's a very good, it's a very interesting point. I wonder if part of it might be driven by young women being attracted to sober men, to men who don't drink alcohol. I imagine, like all parts of the UK, young men in particular are pretty heavy drinkers in Scotland, I think. And I can quite see how having a partner who believes in traditional values and doesn't drink would be pretty appealing for a young woman wanting a family.
Yeah, and I mean, you've got we know what we know about some of the stats now is that women who have had their career first, they've had their first child in their mid-30s, who don't want to go back to work. They want to stay home with their families. So they've had the career thing, don't value it as much as they value the life with their children and their family. And I think there's some work to be done to look at those real stats and that real evidence, because the counter narrative to that is women, power, choice, stepping outside of that zone, when in actual fact, there are other statistics that are saying other stories. And it's this generalistic statement that is it diminishes women who want those other things. So I think there's room for some research there that would bring all of these stats out so women can have alternative choices. Because one of the things, I worked for Prevent, and I don't know what you think about this, Richard, but I worked for the Prevent agenda for 12 months. I was part of the committee in Wales, and that was all around, it was about counter-terrorism, extremism, and looking at particularly the younger element of that and how you can prevent young people from getting into certain ideologies. It wasn't just Islam, it was far right, far left, far anything that's on the extreme football tendencies and stuff like that. And one of the things that came out of that was that the biggest thing is belonging. And I think with feminism, what you've got is young girls who are looking for somewhere to belong with a narrative they're not sure of right now. And you've got these extreme women then, like, the Scottish leader, like Jess Phillips, who are shouting this very strong voice, and then it's natural to gravitate towards that voice because it's a voice and it's female and it's an identity. And do I want that identity? And I think there's an element of, I don't know what you think, because you're in a different position. So do you get to see those kinds of stats when you're building up, the decisions for the party?
Yeah, I think it's a worldwide phenomenon that the younger generations are becoming a little bit more conservative, socially conservative in their outlook. Okay. I've seen all sorts with regard to like alcohol abuse, illegal drug use, sexual relationships, life plans, career, family balance, etc. So then there is a shift there. I think it's basically human nature reasserting itself, because that's what a lot of progressive thinking is. It's a war on human nature, isn't it? It's trying to persuade men and women to not do the things that they really would like naturally to do. So it's basically never going to work. So I think that human nature is reasserting itself. I think there's, again, research around the world that shows that generally mothers would prefer to be working less and to be with their kids more. And yet every political party in Britain, if they want to appeal to women, it's always how we'll provide you with more childcare. It's never, we'll try and do something, we'll try and restructure things so that you can make the choice that you actually want to make. Now, how does that happen? It's partly the disconnect because the women in Parliament are not representative of women in general.
I think you're right.
And it's partly that just the other voice just doesn't get heard, is not represented somehow. And in terms of belonging, I think for young people especially, they often want a cause, don't they? Especially at the moment, there's quite a big emphasis that a big part of your identity is which noble causes you're supporting. So be it climate change or whatever else. And feminism has become one of those. So it's a route to being a good person, to presenting yourself as a good person, and also internally to feel that you have a purpose and meaning in your life, that you're promoting gender equality. And I say I think that's part of the appeal. Part of the appeal is they think it's true that women are getting a hard time and it's an injustice that needs tackling. But the other part of the appeal is just being so 100% sure that you're on the right side, that you're battling evil along with your sisters and brothers.
It's the belonging. It's you're victim. You've been told you're a victim, and then you're looking for a place where there's a strong voice to be led. And I think there needs to be a counter narrative that's created that enables other choices, other decisions, and whether that's balanced with men being included for women, and that narrative that says, there's nothing bad about being a housewife or being a mum or choosing to have a more humble lifestyle like mine, that I want mine to be. But, just having the separate choices and seeing this joining in that as well. Yeah. It seems to be. Anyway, we've got some more questions.
Sorry, Sally, just before we come on to those, Richard, I love that sentence of yours. I'm going to steal it shamelessly. Progressivism is a war on human nature. That's a beautiful sentence. That there is somebody, I think it was Douglas Wallace, who counsels against being too overtly anti-progressive, on the basis that plenty of people will count themselves progressive who might still believe in some of the things we're talking about, which I think is a fair point. We had, in case anyone doesn't know, we had on the first day of this conference on Monday, the release of a world premiere of Hannah Gall's documentary, Progressivism is Destroying Men, Families, Society and Civilization. An absolutely outstanding piece of work. I'm hoping that we'll put up the live Q&A this evening. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it to that, but I have a discussion with well, that was with you, Richard, wasn't it? On Monday. So hopefully people can catch that. So with apologies for the interruption, Sally, would you like to ask the next question?
So Douglas has asked, there is already little interest by men in marriage, thanks to the anti-male rhetoric and policies.
This isn't even Steve Moxon question.
I know, what's going on with me? Because I was thinking, why? Do you know what happened? I was thinking, why don't men want to get married? I
can't even suggest you have a stiff whiskey.
No, sorry, forgive me. And policies. If you expose that marriage is primarily for the purpose of women, aren't you going to be giving men even more reason to keep away from it?
Right, that's a good point. I think marriage benefits men as well, though. So I was saying that the fact that feminists oppose it doesn't make any sense, because it does suit women, but it also provides what's best for men. Because I think men, generally speaking, would tend to be less committed in a relationship. Okay, and I think that's not a strength in men. Let's put it that way. That's a weakness. It would be better if men did commit to a relationship with the intention of doing everything they could to make it work, to be a father for their children in the home as they're grown up, etc. So I think marriage is beneficial to men and women. Now, in terms of the features of marriage, or the interpretation, the application of law, whatever, is making it disadvantageous for men in certain situations, I think that's a very serious issue, and that's one as the family party we want to get to the bottom of and to sort out. But it's a difficult one to do. I mean, the family courts, it's obvious that the family courts don't work in many ways. They're very biased, very skewed view of things. But trying to actually identify the problem and put it right isn't that simple. But it's definitely something we want to do. But yeah, we do believe that marriage is best for men and for women. Again, I think the data is on our side with that.
Did you know that when they looked at the death rates between single men and married men live longer?
Yeah, married men tend to do better on virtually anything you can measure. So it does seem to be beneficial, and certainly marrying is far, far better than cohabiting. That's really the comparison that needs to be made. And the other factor, of course, we're not just talking about men and women. You could argue that number one priority should be children. And again, virtually anything you can measure, children on average tend to have better outcomes if their parents are married. If their parents are present in the family home throughout their upbringing, but that's much more likely if they're married.
I agree. Do you want to ask the next one, Mike, or shall I?
Yes, interesting. We have a number here, but yes, another interesting question from Douglas Wallace. Sorry to come back to the subject, but your manifesto speaks out against extremism. Is there an implication that you would outlaw feminism, which is an extremist movement which undermines the democratic tradition, restricts rights and freedoms, and stirs up hatred, employs violence and terror, and engages in physically intimidating behavior? So no leading questions there, Richard.
Right. So let's look at your definition of extremism, and I'll compare it to feminism in Scotland. Okay. We could talk about whether your definitions are. Oh, sorry, the question's gone. Is it in dismiss?
Oh,
now?
sorry. Let me just put that back, Douglas. Sorry, Richard. Sorry, just 2 seconds.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, it's
yeah, got it. Okay.
It's this third one down.
Yeah. Undermine the democratic tradition. I would say that feminism in Scotland does attack democracy in a small way, in that they want to have like quotas for seats. So it may be very soon the law in Scotland will be that the Scottish Family Party has to operate on feminist principles in choosing its candidates. So we have to have half male, half female. That might well be coming by the next election, okay, which is completely wrong. Restricts rights and freedoms, right, stirs up hatred. I wouldn't go that far. I think if you use the phrase stirs up hatred in this situation, then you've maybe devalued the phrase. I would say it stirs up antagonism towards men, or it demeans men. I'm not sure I'll go quite that far. Employs violence and terror. I've got no evidence of that at all from feminism in Scotland. Engages in physically intimidating behavior. Again, I've got no reason to believe that happens in Scotland either. So I wouldn't class feminism in Scotland as an extremist group. By extremism in that context, that's meaning like anti-democratic and violent. So if there were feminists in Scotland who were anti-democratic and violent, then we would oppose them as a form of extremism. But the manifestation of feminism that is actually there, we oppose it, but not as a form of extremism, just as something that's wrong and damaging to society and illogical and whatever, and all the usual arguments.
Landry makes a very interesting point. He's not asked this as a question, but makes a very good point in the chat stream. I agree. Married men live longer and have happier lives, but only so long as they're married. They remain married. Married men who divorce do not. It's a misrepresentation of marriage to say that it benefits men when those men who have been married but divorced are excluded once they're divorced. That's quite an interesting nuance there, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a good point. I think part of the rationale for marriage is to enhance relationship stability. It's to minimize the incidence of relationship breakdown. And the reasons it does that, well, there are lots of reasons. I mean, part is that there is a public commitment, there's the legal side to it, etc. So marriage is designed to minimize the amount of relationship breakdown, because relationship breakdown is very powerful and damaging to adults and to children. So yes, even where there is marriage, there's still going to be relationship breakdown, but the big picture is that marriage minimizes the amount of it, and that's a very important reason to promote marriage, in my view. Because if you look at the ill effects of divorce, I mean, they've been multiplied many times over when, for example, cohabiting relationships break down, and that's equally damaging to the people involved and to the children. But marriage reduces the incidence of relationship breakdown. Yeah,
I think you would agree, Richard. I mean, I don't know, but that marriage is such a risk for men. I mean, we often use the metaphor that you know, if you're a man and you're about to take your first parachute jump and you're at 10,000 feet, and you just hear through so someone tells you that 50% of the parachutes in the plane are defective and won't open. You know, if any man who said okie dokie, those sound like good odds to me, and jumps, well, you know, you'd want to put him in a padded cell. And yet men who walk down the aisle are doing exactly that. And the reasons why they do is something else. But do you accept that marriage is unacceptably risky for men today?
No, I don't. It comes to, if a man wants to have a sexual relationship with a woman, then I think the best context for that, the probability of that being successful is maximized through marriage.
Well, it might be maximized, Richard, but it's still very risky. You must surely accept that. I mean, if a woman wants to deny her ex-partner access to the kids, she'll have the support of the family courts in doing so. Why would men sign up to I mean, quite apart from distribution of assets following divorce? I mean, why would men? Well, I guess why would men jump from the plane, Richard?
Okay, going back to your parachute analogy, I would say, okay, if 50% of the parachutes don't open, then I would say, if I was going to jump out of a plane, then I would want to check my own parachute very carefully. So the way that a lot of people seem to be happy to do is take one at random, I would say, you really need to look at this very carefully. Because if you are marrying someone, then you should be at the point where you're confident that they're reliable, trustworthy, of good character or whatever. Now, I know obviously you can't assess that, and people change. Even if you assess it at one point in time, the person might change in the future. But I feel if someone makes the right steps there, makes the wisest decision possible about who to marry, then the probability of divorce can be pretty low. And also it's to do with the way people behave within the marriage as well. It's not just about choosing the right person. It's not like with the parachute that you jump out of the plane. It's while you're falling, you don't start like cutting away at the strings of your parachute or whatever. So it's to do with the way people behave during the marriage. And if both partners have got the right attitude to sustaining the marriage, again, that's going to maximize the probability that it's going to be successful. And you can say as well, and that's part of the process of deciding who to marry. I mean, I would advise people to marry someone who really understands the philosophy of marriage and is really committed to it and understands the sort of sacrifices and effort that's going to be needed to make it work. And then when you've got that shared understanding, then that's the ideal. Is it still a risk? Yes. I mean, entering into any sort of relationship, entering into a sexual relationship, having children, is always going to involve a risk. But I think for most people, the rewards are so great that the
Richard, can I say, and I mean it as a compliment, that was a great politician's answer. I was reminded though of a card I saw gosh, 20 or 30 years ago in a shop where there's a bride and groom having presumably just got married, looking into each other's eyes, lovingly. And there's a thought bubble from his pointing to his head where he's thinking, oh, I love her. I hope she never changes. And she's thinking, while she's smiling beautifully, right, now I can let the crazy out, and change this man for the better. And I think that most men will tell you that there comes a point when the crazy's let out, and it's often surprisingly soon after the wedding day.
Yeah, I mean, let's leave marriage out of it then. If you leave marriage out of it completely, then you can still apply that. If someone wants to have a family, wants to have children, then you've got to choose the right person for that.
Yes, no. Landray says, I think Richard should pass, I'm not quite sure what that word means here, should maybe explain more clearly the differences between a commitment to marriage and commitment to the actual relationship.
Yeah, so if someone's going to enter, if someone wants a family, then what they need to do, if it's the right man, they need to basically find a woman that they think suitable, who's willing to marry them, and then enter into that relationship, have children, etc. Now that involves risks, and as I said, sort of assessing the partner in advance and then building the relationship. That applies whether marriage is involved or not. Okay, so that risk is not inherent to marriage. That's just inherent in the activity. Now, I believe that marriage reduces those risks because it places clearer boundaries around the relationship, and it's made public and explicit the commitment to each other, the lifelong commitment to each other. And I think that public commitment changes the psychology of the people within the marriage, and it makes them more likely to persevere with it and to act within the relationship as though opting out isn't an option, that they've just got to persevere and sort things out.
Right.
I know that that's not like foolproof, that doesn't work every time, but in general, that helps. So the risks you're talking about are unavoidable, but marriage reduces them, I suggest.
Yeah.
So how was my answer like a politician? I'm quite offended.
I'd like to say that the problem is that the state incentivizes women to divorce. Something like 75% of the divorces are filed for by women because they very often become financially enriched, and so on through it. But your issue about I hate to plug my own books, as you know, Richard, but I wrote a book in 2009, The Fraud of the Rings, and that talked about exactly why a majority of marriages either fail completely or are unhappy. So Sally, would you like to ask? Sorry, Tom's
yes,
question,
please.
Tom's question is very interesting. I don't know if you want to go on to that.
Okay, we've got 4 questions. So Richard, if you wouldn't mind keeping them it'd be great if we could, these guys have thought them, that'd be great if you could fit them in 8 minutes. So Tom is asking, there is an interesting overlap between Richard's social I haven't got my glasses on. I can't even say that word.
Conservatism.
Sorry, I need to put my glasses on. Sally's description of women's role in Islam and Mike's account of anti-feminism. Have you met any leftist progressive types in the men's rights movement?
No. Basically, I think the set of values that I would tend to call conservative, they are reflected in basically mainstream religions, and within the political movement as well, and within the men's rights activism movement. Have I found a left progressive type? I would say not. Having said that, I do meet people who describe themselves as progressive, and I think, well, virtually everything I think of as progressive, you reject it. But they think progressive means I'm really keen not to be a racist or a sexist, and I want to help relieve poverty or something. And they think that's what progressivism is. So it can be a definition issue.
Okay.
It is, of course, I think, to many of its adherents, progressivism is, of course, it's a religion in itself. It's a godless religion, of course, but what is Marxism if not a religion that defies rational challenging? More than 100 million people have died as a result of communism, and yet most youngsters will call themselves socialists. It's madness.
I also have not
there are a few progressives, because progressives almost by definition have to accept feminism.
Okay, can we crack on and just have it?
Please do, Sally. Yes, you carry on.
Okay. So Sean has asked, how visible in the Women's Equality Party on BBC Scotland, south of the border? It seems to get massive boost. Sorry, when the thing deleted it, moved the text.
Right. Now, I don't see it particularly in the media. I would say the Women's Equality Party is the most unnecessary party in the universe. It's trying to influence the already totally feminist parties to become feminists. I mean, it's totally bizarre. Yeah, that's enough about the Women's Equality Party.
I just like to add one thing there. I forget the woman's name now. It goes back a bit, but the leader of the Women's Equality Party at the time stood against Philip Davis in Shipley, and she lost her deposit, which very, very pleasingly.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea why they even do it. I really don't.
We hammered them in the Scottish elections as well, by a mile.
Okay, good. Right, second one. By seeking positive change, isn't the Scottish Family Party by nature progressive?
Yeah, it's a definition thing as well, isn't it? As someone says, sometimes, if you're heading in the wrong direction, the most progressive thing you can do is turn around and head back in the other direction. So, yeah, no one wants to say they're against progress, do they? I mean, progress is positive by definition. Mm-hmm. It's the genius of the left, if you like, to make up terms for themselves that are sort of irrefutable. We're for progress. Well, we're for justice. Mm-hmm. No one's going to say, "Oh, well, we're the other side of the argument. We're against justice." Mm-hmm. And the media allows them to do it. They allow them to create their own lexicon, which then becomes the lingua franca of the media and of the culture, and it's entirely designed to lead people in one direction. So
there's also, I think, a difference between. Sorry, Richard, a difference between conservatives and progressives, I think, in that conservatives are willing to sort of change over time and say they got things wrong. Progressives never do. So they have a position on abortion. They love it. 73 million unborn children killed every year. No progressive will say, maybe that's too many corpses.
Yeah, the great thing you get with progressivism in Scotland is whatever problem they're looking at. This is in education in particular. I mean, Scottish education is a disaster area. But whenever the latest report comes out saying that standards have declined yet again, they know the answer already. The answer is always, we've got to go even further in the direction we're going. So things have got worse every time we've headed in this direction. But the reason they're getting worse is just we haven't quite gone far enough in the same direction. Yes. And eventually, if you keep going far enough in the same direction, it'll all turn on its head and it'll all be sorted out. It's delusional. It's completely delusional.
Okay, so your last question, just to fit in the last one. Regardless of how wise someone is when entering marriage, wouldn't you agree 50% of marriages end in divorce? And that's from Carl.
If that's the statistic, yeah, okay. But the proportion for people who don't get married for cohabiting is far, far higher, far higher.
There is a nuance here, which people often say, well, I mean, I guess 50% of marriages roughly across the developed world end in divorce. And there's almost an implication very often that the other 50% are happy. And I think you have to be kidding. Men particularly know that they face financial ruin if they divorce. And, if they didn't, the divorce rate, it would be men applying for 75% of divorce applications.
So what's the answer then? What's your recommendation? Just cohabitation?
No. Well, yes, I think even that will become dangerous in time when partners have financial rights from cohabitation. But that's I think we could spend another hour on that question alone, really, couldn't we? So I'm afraid I have to wrap it up there. Thank you, Richard, for a wonderful hour. I knew that would be good. Oh, Steve Moxon says the answer is to live apart. Thank you, Richard. Absolutely wonderful.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone as well for chipping in.
And I wish you the best with your party. And we will speak again. Sally, thank you so much for co-hosting with me again.
It's okay. It's a pleasure.
Who do we have? Oh, we have Robin Aitken, a former BBC journalist. Now probably the most impressive critic of the BBC. So that'll be in another hour. And thank you to the attendees, especially those who asked questions. And it's goodbye from us.
Yeah. Take care. Have a good
Bye-bye.
day. Bye.